didn't start the recorder. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Oh, okay. No problem.
Can we start over? I am so
Yes.
sorry. Oh my goodness. Where and when were you born?
So I was born in 2005 in Sacramento, California.
And do you have siblings?
Yeah, I have a twin actually who's my age, so she's 14.
But twins tend to be the same age, right?
Yeah.
And she's not particularly a climate activist like you.
Yeah, no, we're very different personalities. So I'm really passionate about climate activism, and she's really passionate about other subjects like women's rights and volleyball. So.
Mm-hmm. They kind of goes together, women's rights and climate change, because somehow the majority of young climate activists are young women. Would you agree with that?
Yes, and the climate crisis is actually very intersectional. So women, especially from developing countries, are most impacted by the climate crisis because they are the most likely to become climate refugees. Women are also more likely to suffer from the health effects of the climate crisis, like asthma, than men.
Mm-hmm. And if there were three words to describe you to someone who didn't know you, what would they be?
I would say determined, strong-willed, and passionate.
And you're in 8th grade?
Yeah, I'm currently in 8th grade.
What are your favorite subjects? What do you like in school?
I really like history right now, and language arts and science. Math is not my strong suit, but I'm trying to like it more because I know that it's really important.
Yeah. If I know it's a little early, but if you had your dream college and green dream major, what would they be?
Oh, okay, I've actually thought about this because my mom went to UC Berkeley, so I want to go there.
I went there too.
Away from my house. But they have one of the best environmental science programs in the country, and I'd either major in like foreign affairs / political science or political science and environmental science.
Super. I loved Berkeley. It's such an education to be
Yeah.
someplace with people all around the world on campus. Just being there was an education.
Yeah.
And then how did you get interested in in climate activism? What were the light bulbs that went off for you? I've got to do something.
So when I was 10 years old, I went to India for the first time, and I was kind of appalled by the amount of air pollution there. I didn't know that we could let pollution get this out of hand. And as a person with asthma, I found it nearly impossible to breathe, and I had asthma attacks even inside. I couldn't fathom how people had to live like this and how children had to live like this. And as I would later learn, the pollution was just a symptom of a larger issue, which was the climate crisis. So that kind of spurred my concern regarding the climate crisis, and I really decided that I could no longer let these fears linger in the back of my brain. I had to take action, and that kind of was decided during the Paradise Fire, or the Camp Fire, which occurred in Paradise, California, which is only a 2-hour drive from where I live. So we got a lot of the smoke here, and I struggled to breathe, and I just couldn't believe that the climate crisis could impact me a world away in California, because I had bought into the narrative that it was a far-off phenomenon, because if it was like really a crisis, I would have learned about it and I would have known about it.
And have they started discussing it in school? I mean, do they just say that it's an imminent issue? It's not some future, it's something and that's a problem in the future?
Yeah, so I bet that it differs from school to school, but in my school there has been mentions of climate change, but we've never really gone in depth on the issue, and there's really never any mention of the systemic change that is needed to kind of rectify the situation. There's never really any mention of how our current political gridlock is impacting the climate crisis, because I understand that schools are really afraid to get political, but honestly, the climate crisis is too important to not teach children about it.
If you were some kind of empress, God forbid, what changes would you make to the system?
So I would form a plan to get the United States to 100% renewable energy by 2030. I would probably implement the Green New Deal for public housing. And I would also, if this applied to California, I would stop oil drilling in California immediately, because despite having an image as one of the most environmentally friendly states in the nation, we are actually one of the largest oil producers in the nation. And it's that kind of hypocrisy that is really dangerous, because though Governor Newsom has done a lot of great work, we have just a ways to go.
A long ways, yeah.
Yeah.
How did you decide I've got to take action? What did you do that was action oriented after the campfire?
Yeah, so in May of 2019, I decided that I was going to strike for climate. Now, I can't strike every Friday, but I did organize a small strike in Sacramento, where I live, on May 24th. And I didn't really expect anybody to come. We didn't even have speakers or a permit. I was kind of just there with a megaphone and a sign. But 40 people came, and that was really shocking for me. And from that point on, I'm like, dang, people actually care about this. I have to do something. So I founded Fridays for Future Sacramento and got involved with Earth Uprising and a host of other organizations.
What did your sign say that first strike?
I think I have it right there.
Oh, good. Show us.
Oh, wait. Okay, 1 second. I need to find it.
Okay.
Okay. So it says, I don't know if you can see it, but it says your children need you to act, or your child needs you to act.
What does the little box in the corner say? Show us again.
It says Fridays for Future Sacramento, and I also drew the Earth Uprising logo on there.
How did you find out about Fridays for Future?
So my grandfather showed me Greta Thunberg's TED Talk, which I think is how a lot of us kind of knew about her.
The one at the UN?
He showed me the UN speech after, but I think that he originally showed me her TED Talk. I think it was TEDx Stockholm. But I was kind of just fascinated. I'm like, wow, as a young person, I can actually have transformative impact. Because I had seen how other youth-led movements had kind of come about, but I mean, I wasn't even a teenager yet, so I really didn't think that I could do anything when I was younger. I thought that the threshold for doing anything in the world was kind of 14 and above. But I just realized how pressing the situation was, and I didn't really know what I was doing, but I just started a social media page. I thought it was going to be a one-time thing, and here we are.
And what platform did you use for your page?
I used Instagram. I find that that's kind of the best way to communicate with a lot of youth, because honestly, none of us are on Facebook, and Twitter. I think Twitter's a really good platform, but I feel like only activisty or political youth are on that platform. So I think that Instagram is kind of the best way to absorb new people into the movement.
And do you always include some image, a picture with your Instagram posts?
Yeah. So yeah, on Instagram it's kind of just pictures. So I usually will include graphics for strikes and stuff like that.
And how many followers do you have now on your Instagram page?
On my personal Instagram, I have no clue. On my or my group's Instagram, I upwards of 700. I really haven't checked, so I don't
know. What about Earth Uprising? How did that get started? Because that's a new one to me.
Yeah. So Earth Uprising was founded by Alexandria in 2019, and our objective is to kind of create a mass mobilization of youth, and how our theory of change is kind of different than other organizations is that we really believe that education leads to sustained participation in our movement. We don't only want to educate kids on climate science, we also want to tell them about historical movements and kind of use the lessons that they're learning as a catalyst for the future action. So that's kind of our thing. And we are a newer organization, so obviously it's always hard getting started, but we have some really cool things coming out.
What might be useful is my book, Resist, Goals and Tactics for Changemakers. It's a $10 ebook that you can get on various platforms. And it's everything that I could find about how to make a successful activist campaign.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get in touch with Alexandra?
So Alexandria actually DM'd me on Instagram like before she even started Earth Uprising, because I followed her from my local climate group's account, and she DM'd me and she was like, hey, like I didn't know that there was kind of climate activism where I used to live like near Davis, California, so I live in Sacramento, which is like 20 minutes away from Davis. And we kind of started talking, and like in May, I believe, and I kind of reached out to her in, I think, June or July, and I was like, hey, I saw that you started Earth Uprising. Is there any way that I can get involved? So I became their partnerships coordinator, and it kind of all started just because of an Instagram DM, which I think is kind of cool.
Very cool. And then how is it structured? Because that's an issue in activist groups, is how do we get things done, not be too hierarchical, include people, but be efficient. So what have you worked out?
So our structure is so we have our city coordinators, and then the people who kind of assist the city coordinators in any way that they need are country ambassadors. So we have ambassadors from a host of countries, and then we have our continental leads who are part of our Earth Uprising youth staff, which I'm a part of. And our continental leads kind of oversee all of the country ambassadors. And honestly, I think that our structure is really great. I know that hierarchy is always an issue, but I really do think that with Earth Uprising, like our city coordinators are so important. Like they are the reason why we exist as an organization. So I'm really thankful for them.
Roughly how many city coordinators and how many countries are involved?
So I'm not exactly sure how many countries, but I think that we have 20 plus city coordinators. I'm partnerships director, so I don't exactly know, but I believe that we have that many.
And how do you stay in touch? I mean, technically, how do you talk?
So I think that we communicate through WhatsApp and email, and then for our core team, we also have like a chat on Instagram just for sending like climate memes and fun stuff like that. But primarily we communicate through WhatsApp.
Have you met any of the other city coordinators face to face?
So I am not a city coordinator, so I haven't, because I do work with other local groups, so I haven't really met any other city coordinators, which I hope to do because they all seem really amazing, but I keep in touch with them through Instagram. But I actually met the rest of the Earth Uprising youth staff at our retreat in LA in January, so that was really amazing because it's like, wow, these people who, like, I never really thought about them existing outside of the internet as silly but it was really cool. We had fun and we connected with a bunch of local activists.
And how many people came to that LA meeting about?
I'd say 13, including our adult chaperones, which there were 3 of.
And how many of those 13 were young women?
All except for Rafik and Muhammad. Wait, I need to count this, sorry. I'd say around 10. I might be forgetting somebody. Like 9 or 10.
And why that we mentioned before that that's typical globally. for young climate activists. Why do you think that is? Why aren't there boys that are half of the effort?
Yeah, I've actually thought about this a lot, and I'm not quite sure. But I think that the climate movement just really attracts a lot of women for whatever reason. But I think that is part of the reason that we have such like strong bonds. Maybe not because we're all women, but because we are all really able to form like emotional connections to what we're doing and with each other. And that's not to say that men can't do that. It just seems that the climate movement is majority female. So yeah.
A young woman that I talked to from Georgia said, in terms of teens, that it's not cool for boys to be activists, I guess, of any kind.
Yeah.
Is there a coolness factor going on here?
Honestly, I'm not really sure because I do live in California, which I try to be mindful of because we're kind of like this little like liberal bubble. So it might be different in other states, but honestly, like I have local activist friends, but like not anybody my age. So I just think that climate activists are like kind of uncommon, and I think that the fact that we see female leadership at the forefront of this movement, um, like the like Greta Thunberg and Esther Hersey and Alexandria, all of who are amazing, like powerful females, I think that that opens up space for a lot of young women to participate.
Do you think some boys might be threatened by that and think, oh, this is a female thing, it's not a guy thing?
Yeah, I would hope not, but honestly, the climate movement is not immune from any of these issues. We've had issues of racism and sexism, and while I genuinely like love most of the climate movement, obviously at the end of the day we are still people. So I'm not really sure. I would sincerely hope not, because honestly, like our world is burning up. It might not be cool now, but it will be cool later, I suppose, when
It's
we're
so
not
hot.
at this. I just try not to think about it because it's very stressful.
Yeah. One of the issues in activism is burnout. And how do you deal with that? And how many hours roughly do you spend a week organizing?
Okay, so it definitely differs from week to week. I am not really good at holding myself accountable for like not burning out. I think that my mom is really good at that because I had one week where I had 10 hours of conference calls. Um, and she kind of had to shut me down after that. She's like, you were going a week without conference calls. So that's something that I have to work on because honestly, if you are not like a completely like formed person yourself, or if you are not feeling good, the work that you produce will not be as great. And honestly, we need to value self-care within activist spaces because it's so easy to get burnt out with like the weight of the world on our shoulders. So we need all of our activists in like the best mental state that they can because mental health comes first.
So, like in Earth Uprising, which it seems you're most involved with, what do you do to encourage each other for self care?
Yeah, so I think that we honestly we don't keep the conversation just climate focused. Like that's something that really helps, and especially to like kind of humanize other folks. We talk about like what's going on at school, like memes and TikTok, and just regular teenager stuff in addition to the climate crisis. So I think that's something that really, really helps. We occasionally like get goofy, and that's okay because we're all people. So I think just recognizing that is really important. Like I know what people like siblings look like and who their friends are at school, and I think that that's just as important as solving the climate crisis is creating these personal relationships with people so that they can be honest with you and so they feel comfortable taking a step back when they're burnt out.
Mm. Um, so a lot of climate activists get trolls and negative comments, and if they're striking, people yell obscenities at them. Have you had to experience that? And if so, how do you cope?
So I just made my social media public. So I really haven't experienced anything by way of social media, but I did publish an op-ed in my local paper, and I didn't even know that there was a comment section, but I got a lot of negative comments and a lot of people attacking me. And honestly, I just try not to read it because, like, this, I don't know if this sounds pretentious, but at the end of the day, I think that the majority of the world does believe in the climate crisis. And if you are a climate denier, obviously it's very important that you believe in the climate crisis. But I think that it's more important to mobilize the people who already do believe in this crisis than those who are attacking teenagers online.
Right. This is kind of a footnote, but Bernie Sanders was really upset after Sunrise Movement endorsed him that he didn't get the youth turnout vote in the primaries, and that's always been the case, that youth are less likely to vote than older people, which is really a shame. What's going on? I mean, it seems with a president like Trump that would really mobilize people.
I mean, I think that there is a deep-rooted sense of cynicism within youth today, which I'm not going to blame them for, because honestly, with our political leaders not really doing anything on these huge issues that will impact our futures, many youth feel like politics won't do anything for us, that our political leaders don't care about us. They mostly care about the whims of corporations. So I think that that's something that is really unfortunate, is kind of cynicism um, within our youth, and that's a big issue. I have someone I know, my neighbor actually, who I was talking about the election, and he told me that why would you care about the election, because none of these candidates will do anything for us anyways.
Oh.
So that's kind of the attitudes that we need to prevent, and also seeing politicians doing more outreach to young folks would be great.
Well, Bernie's done that. Why do you think that your generation is, it seems to me, unique in the youth of activists? I mean, I don't know of other generations where 9-year-olds and 11-year-olds are leading campaigns. What do you think is going on that Gen Z can take that kind of leadership?
Yeah, so I think that the idea that youth can have a transformative impact within social justice movements is not new, because during the civil rights movement, students from North Carolina organized the Greensboro Sit-In. During the Vietnam War opposition in the 1960s and 1970s, it was youth who were protesting because it was youth who were being drafted. I think that one of the things about the climate movement that is so unique is we are seeing children as young as 9 or 10 standing up to protest this. And I really think that that's because, with obviously all movements are vital, and our movement is operating on a very slim time frame, which I think is kind of something that is unique to the climate movement, because we have a deadline. We have a scientifically set deadline, which is something that is really heavy, but also something that kind of motivates you to get out there, because we are in the fight of our lives, and this is not an exaggeration.
My kitty wants to say hello.
Oh,
Hello, Supriya. Hello. Do you think that as youth get more political and economic power, that they'll change? Because what happened with baby boomers is they were hippies in the 60s, but as they got older, they didn't necessarily stay activists. So what do you predict for your generation as they get power?
Yeah, I really, really hope that kind of we turn the tide on these issues as a generation. But I think that one of the issues is with the climate crisis, we literally cannot wait until I'm old enough to run for office. So I will be old enough to run when I am 25 years old. I believe that's for the House of Representatives. But the issue is that I will be 25 years old in 10 years. And 10 years is the amount of time the United Nations has given us to act on the climate crisis. So I cannot wait until I'm old enough to run for office or even wait until I'm old enough to vote because we are operating within such a slim time frame.
Right. So is Earth Uprising making an effort to get out the youth vote, or what are you prioritizing for your actions?
So currently because there are a lot of other orgs doing amazing electoral work, we are currently focusing on education campaigns because we feel that that's a space where we're kind of needed. Also, as an organization, we are pretty new, so we are doing some internal work, and we are nonpartisan, so that can be kind of sticky. But I think that we're really filling an area where we feel there's a void, and I definitely commend the other awesome new climate orgs on all of the amazing electoral work that they're doing, because it is so important to turn out youth.
Well, the people that I think of the forefront are the Never Again Parkland students. Who else do you think of who's doing vote registration work?
So I think that I believe that Zero Hour and Sunrise Movement are doing stuff like that, specifically for Bernie Sanders because that is who they have endorsed. But I think Rock the Vote is doing a lot of great work.
Oh, right.
Other organizations. So I just think that that's something that's really important, and I hope to see youth turning out in all elections and not just presidential ones, because I mean, like state assembly races are so important and they don't get enough turnout, as are congressional races, and even city council races are really, really important.
Right. So when you say education, do you mean online? Do you mean school curriculum? How do you, what's the venue for educating?
Yeah, so currently we're exploring a lot of ways to educate youth, but we're primarily exploring kind of what we can do in regards to curriculum and including social justice and climate justice in our educational work.
Is that in the form of supplemental texts, videos? What media are you using to change curriculum, add to curriculum?
Yeah, so at the moment we are trying to use text. We are in the beginning of this campaign, so I'm sure that we're going to use lots of different mediums, but I can't speak too much about it because it hasn't been released yet.
Okay. You work as building partnerships, so what kind of other groups do you work with?
So we are working with the Climate Mobilization, their Climate Emergency Roundtable. So they are a group of organizations, ourselves included, and the roundtable seeks to get Congress to declare a climate emergency and sign on to the National Climate Emergency Declaration. And we also have recently partnered with this organization called Polluters Out, or not organization, they think of themselves as more of a coalition of different organizations, but they are having a global action on March 20th to urge our leaders to kick polluters out of climate discussions. Particularly, they're also targeting COP26, which is the United Nations Climate Summit, because it's ridiculous that polluters should have a spot at like one of the world's largest negotiating tables, because honestly, some of these businesses just will not self-destruct.
Really?
And it's just not a financially smart move to do that, but it is necessary for my generation.
What do you know about who started Polluters Out?
So Helena, I don't know her last name, Aisha and Isabella Falahi began Polluters Out. So they are the founders of that. It's a relatively new coalition. So
And do they live in the States?
um, So I think Helena lives in South America. I think it's Ecuador. I might be wrong. Um, and then Isabella lives in Indiana, and Aisha lives in New York City.
And do you work with them too, or, I mean, how do you help them out?
So this partnership is actually new as of yesterday. So I think that most of the work that we're going to be doing is kind of amplifying their message on social media, and I'm involved in their calls, so kind of just contributing that way. So yeah.
And are there other groups that you work with? I mean, not that that's not plenty, but I don't want to leave anyone out.
Yeah, so we are currently exploring partnerships with a range of other groups, but since they aren't solidified yet, I don't want to include anybody who does not wish to be included.
What other youth-led groups do you know of in the U.S. or internationally that we haven't mentioned?
There are so many. Okay, so okay, let me count. There is Zero U.S. Climate Strike, Earth Guardian, the International Indigenous Youth Council, um, Sunrise Movement, Earth Uprising, Fridays for Future USA. There has to be other ones, but I'm probably forgetting.
Well, we can. And except for Earth Guardians, are they mostly youth led by girls?
Yeah, I think that I don't really know much about the leadership of Earth Guardians, but I think that most of them are primarily female-led. I mean, the leadership within U.S. Youth Climate Strike, I know, is pretty female, and as is the executive director of Sunrise Movement is a woman, Varshini Prakash. So.
Where do you see yourself, let's say, 10 years from now? What will you be doing? You'll have graduated maybe from Berkeley with poli-sci international studies degree, environmental studies minor.
Yeah, so this is so cliche. It's like kind of a running joke within the activist community because all of us want to run for office.
Oh.
Running for the House of Representatives would be cool. Really just however I can make the greatest impact. So I'm also thinking about kind of like training young women to run for office, or like being a congressional staffer, or running for Congress myself, or like being the mayor of my city, just really any capacity in which I can impact people's lives for the better.
What do you think about it? It seems like the tragedy of running for office is that people start really with high principles, and then they realize, oh, it takes $1 million a day every day to be run again as a senator, or hundreds of thousands for members of the House. So, how do you deal with the realities of having to kiss up to lobbyists to get the money you need to win?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that money in politics is just such a large issue. I don't think that, like, corporations should be deciding our politicians' political stances, because what our politicians often forget is that these are real people's lives being impacted. So I think that that's just a huge issue, and we need to get money out of politics. But I think that there are people who have run campaigns who are free from PAC money and corporate money, and it's possible. I just think that a lot of politicians are afraid, but we have to take these risks because they are fighting for their constituents, and their constituents include a lot of young people whose futures may cease to exist due to the climate crisis. So I think that, yes, it is really hard to get things done in Washington, and compromises must be made. But I don't think that compromising the future of an entire generation to get campaign donations is ethical, and I think that you shouldn't be running for office if you're not going to represent the interests of the people and not big money.
Right. We need campaign finance reform.
Yes.
Clearly.
Yeah.
Do you think of yourself as a feminist?
Oh yeah, totally. I think of myself as a feminist, and I've been learning because I kind of never really thought of feminism as intersectional, but over these past few years, I've kind of been learning about how feminism is shaped by our different experiences and how it's just wildly different depending on your race and your gender and your sexuality and your religion, and one woman's experience cannot speak for all.
Right, right. And what about your friends? What I used to hear from young women is, I'm not a feminist, but I believe in equality. But it seems like now it's more acceptable to say, oh, yeah, I'm a feminist.
Yeah, I mean, I think that all of my friends would say that they're feminists. I don't think that it's as a taboo thing as it what once was, and that's thanks to the work of women's liberation movements.
Another thing I wanted to ask you about that is really on my mind is the studies show that there's an increase in anxiety and depression among teens, especially among girls. And I wonder if you see that with your peers, and if so, why the increase in anxiety and depression?
Yeah, I totally see that. Unfortunately,
Oh,
I definitely see the increase in anxiety. I actually have anxiety. So it's kind of something that is really hard to deal with, but I don't think that there's one reason that we can pinpoint to as or like as to why my generation is so anxious and depressed. I think that a lot of it is because of our current state and how hopeless people feel, and also just the pressures that society puts on, especially young girls, to look perfect and have it all together while our world is kind of collapsing, and to look like Instagram models who like Photoshop their bodies.
and why does that affect girls more than boys? Or is it girls are just more willing to talk about it?
I think that I can't speak from guys' perspectives, but I think that one of the reasons that it's so prominent within young women, especially like body dysmorphia and issues relating to appearance, is because as a society we really do kind of subconsciously tell young girls that their appearance is what matters. It's the reason that all of these products are marketed towards us, saying, well, oh, you have a problem, you need to fix it. Like, I'm sure that before people invented razors, having hairy legs wasn't an issue. Like, I don't know. But I think that a lot of it is just because we want to look like the people we see on TV and on social media, and those people are usually paid to look good and they have teams of people behind them, and especially our beauty standards, like the models are usually able-bodied and white and conform to a certain ideal of beauty.
And often they, at least in the past, they were anorexic,
Yeah,
bulimic,
and that's really disgusting and it's unfortunate.
yeah, I still see models where you can see all their ribs, and they're really, they don't look healthy. They look too skinny. Um, so, are overall, are you optimistic or pessimistic about our ability to turn this around within 10 years?
I really don't know what the future holds for our movement, and I try not to be pessimistic, but I I know that change can come. It's just whether or not it can come fast enough. So I kind of take pride in the fact that I'm doing what I can, because at least if we fail to avert the climate crisis, I can tell my children and I can tell my grandchildren, like, hey, I fought for you. So
Right.
I don't know what the future holds for our movement, but I am going to organize as hard as I can to prevent the climate crisis.
You know, I it just occurred to me, I wonder if everybody's thinking about the coronavirus. And
Oh yeah,
I wonder if that doesn't paint a picture that we're globally interconnected, and nowadays issues are global and climate change is global. And I don't know if there's any connection, but one thing I do think of is it's good for the earth that people aren't flying as much and manufacturing as much and traveling as much. So it kind of gives the earth a break. But do you see any connection with the outreach and the coronavirus? I don't really know.
Yeah, so one of the connections that I see is just how much coronavirus is being talked about.
Yeah.
Obviously, it is a global epidemic and it's a huge issue. I'm not saying that it isn't, but I think that the climate crisis needs to get as much attention as coronavirus is getting. I think that the difference here is that we don't have a huge fossil fuel like industry who are paying to kind of spread false information and to spread lies, honestly. So I think that's one of the major issues in how climate is reported is just that people think of it as an issue that will impact our grandchildren. But like I am the grandchild that you guys were talking about in the 70s because this is going to impact my generation.
Well, yeah, right now the oceans are rising, the climate is warming, more severe weather. We're experiencing that in California with these fires and the extreme weather. Is there anything else that you would add in terms about how to be an effective organizer or how to educate people or about the contribution of Gen X and girls?
Yeah, so I think that kind of women are vital in the kind of climate movement, and that's something that I want to emphasize. And I also want to kind of talk about the intersectionality of the climate crisis and how we kind of need to realize that the climate crisis touches every aspect of our lives, and it also is very intersectional with other systems of oppression. Like, for example, environmental racism. Like communities of color, particularly low-income communities of color, are most impacted by the climate crisis. And women are more impacted, and LGBTQ plus youth who may be homeless, like homeless folks, are impacted. So if you really take a deep dive, it kind of impacts just every societal issue that we have.
Kind of as a footnote, your generation is kind of intrigued with non-binary identification. Do you see that in friends, and how does that fit in with being intersectional in your awareness?
I mean, yeah, I know people who are non-binary. I just think that Gen Z is really unique in that we kind of just do our own thing. We reject labels, and I totally think that we're non-binary people since the beginning of time. I just feel like people are treating it as a new phenomenon, which it absolutely is not. Your gender identity is completely valid, no matter which gender you identify as. I think that we're kind of just grasping these concepts, and the development of social media is just making it easier for people to share their experiences. And hopefully we're creating a community in which LGBTQ plus youth feel less afraid to kind of share their story, because it isn't good. It isn't a good environment for them to share their stories yet. We still have a lot of societal issues regarding like transphobia and homophobia. But hopefully we're trying to create a more inclusive environment. And also, if your activism isn't inclusive of all people, this is actually very relevant to kind of issues within the climate movement now. It isn't climate activism, because we need everybody, including folks from marginalized groups. So we cannot talk about saving the polar bears anymore. We need to talk about like indigenous folks and how their land is being stolen from them and how racism impacts the climate crisis. Like all of these things are thought of as very radical, but it's kind of just fighting for people's human rights and their lives. And if that's radical, I'm fine with being radical.
The people in the autism spectrum, especially in Sweden, kind of fit in that same theme of including everyone who identifies in a variety of ways.
Yeah, so I think that kind of all people need to feel welcome in the climate movement, including like neurodivergent folks. So including folks with autism and other mental conditions, because even if you don't like even if you don't fit into like the conventional box of what an activist is supposed to be, as long as you respect other people and are doing the work that needs to be done, we will gladly welcome you.
Do you know anyone in the U.S. climate movement who identifies as on the autism spectrum?
I don't actually, not somebody who I personally know, but I'm sure that there are definitely people.
You mentioned that sometimes you feel anxious. How does is that because you feel overloaded with schoolwork or the performance stuff, or you worry about the climate, or all of the above?
I think all of the above. Yeah, school is definitely a contributing factor. It's obviously something that all of us have to get through. And then in terms of the climate crisis, I have days where reality kind of sinks in and I'm like, oh my god. I just try not to think about it. That probably isn't the greatest of coping mechanisms, but I think that knowing that I'm doing something about it really helps. And also, it doesn't hurt to just like watch Netflix and just try to forget about the world for a little bit.
Right. Great. Um,